Okay, recording now, alright? Okay, so what we finished off on was a discussion about the fact that a philosopher embodied, according to Aristotle and Plato, embodied, physically practiced the act of discovering truth and knowledge, whereas a sophist, was a living embodiment of deception, right? So, a sophist might use logic, but do they use logic to find truth? What do they use it for? Yeah, exactly. So they wouldn't use it for deception, but they would also use it for persuasion. Yeah? Do you get what I mean? So we'll leave it at that. We'll move on and explore the rest of the content. So now we've got to start taking notes, all right? Before we read, what do we need to know? What do we need to explore? Let's go here. All right, so this book was written at around about 380 BC. All right, it's 5 years before Plato thought, I'm going to create my own school. And the reason why this is important is because it's part of what we call the pre-middle period of Plato's philosophy. Around about this time here, right, is where Plato stops parroting Socrates, according to most historians. It's where Plato starts evolving his own individual thoughts. And his own individual thoughts really come into fruition around about the middle period. So here, where I've got the line of where Gorgias is on the timeline, he's still parroting or he's still copying a lot of what Socrates would have said. But his thoughts are starting to become original, all right? I think that's important. I think you should take a note down so you get more of the historical context, okay? All right. Yeah, so the text that we're studying is called the Gorgias, okay? And one thing you really need to understand about it is that its prime aim, its focus is to examine the good life and human nature. I've drawn this because I wanted to draw like a picture of man evolving and kind of have it in the background of nature, because it kind of showed you that that's what the text is trying to look at. It's our relationship with nature. It's a relationship with ourselves. What is our human nature? These were really important things that were being explored. Okay? And as it does that, it's pretty much divided into 3 conversations. Now, we're not going to read all of these conversations. In fact, the excerpts that we have to read are, it's kind of assumed that we have prior knowledge of the excerpts that came before it. So we're not reading the whole thing, but it's important to know what these 3 sections are, all right? So the first section is a discussion between Socrates and Gorgias himself. The reason why the text is called Gorgias is for the same reason why Phaedo is called Phaedo, right? If you remember Phaedo wasn't really about a discussion with Phaedo. It was a discussion with the 2 other guys, Cerebus and Cibius, right? But Cebes, yes, Cerebus was someone else. Right, so Cebes. And the reason why that happened was because it happened at a party, right? The big gathering that happened over at Phaedo's house. Well, the same thing's happening here. There's a big party going on over at Gorgias' house. And of course, you can imagine what it's like. It's full of men, rich, wealthy men, who've got enough time to talk about issues relating to philosophy, okay? And when they have this discussion with, in his first discussion, he really starts talking about what is rhetoric and what really has value in life, okay? And I'll just basically put this on pause so you can start taking some notes about some important things that I may have said. Okay, and then, after this discussion goes on, they talk about what is valuable and what isn't. We move on to a discussion with a guy whose bust we can't find. So it's Socrates and this guy called Polus. And they question the value of rhetoric, the value of whether or not persuasion is useful. Okay. Now, it's really kind of important to know that the distinction between philosophy and sophistry is drawn out between the discussion with Gorgias and Polus. Because here's where Socrates kind of talks about 4 shams and 4 actual truths. And you kind of need to know a bit of this prior knowledge because it really helps you understand the discussion of Callicles later on. So, he'll say something like, there are certain things that we do that are just kind of shams. They're stupid. And that would be something like, it's really bizarre, okay? So let's say going to the gym versus going to the doctor, right? Or medicine, okay? He would say that the actual sham, the falsehood, thing that's closely related to rhetoric, is going to the gym. Because the gym gives the illusion of health, right? It doesn't actually mean that you are healthy. But if you have proper medicine and you eat nutritionally and everything like that, then basically you're engaging in the truth. Because that creates proper health, right? He says that about other things, cooking versus nutrition as well, yeah? He says cooking is a sham, nutrition is the truth, all right? Cooking creates the illusion that something is good, whereas nutrition actually is the real good. Okay, Fist of 5, how do you understand this difference between shams and true practices? Yeah, cool. Because the last one that he talks about is rhetoric and philosophy. Now, what would be the sham out of the combination of rhetoric and philosophy? What's the sham? Yeah, rhetoric. And what is the truth? All right, so let's quickly take some notes because that's really important to know, okay? All right, now one of the things that becomes really immediate when he's talking to Polus, because Polus asks the more challenging questions, he basically says rhetoric is primarily used in the art of pursuing power. Okay, that's what its sole purpose is. It's not about pursuing truth; it's about power. And if power can kind of make you happy, but does it really? And then this question is basically saying, can you actually be happy if you live an unjust life?
What conversation is
This is with Polus.
And?
So basically one of the major things they ask is, with Polus, discussion between Socrates and Polus, is can you actually be happy if you live an unjust life, if you have done wrong? Okay?
Yes, upset.
And, well, Socrates says no, and so does Polus. They both agree to something really important that you should probably write down, but I haven't put it up here, okay? So I'm just going to, the good thing about recording this. Basically, they say it is worse to do wrong than to suffer wrong. Okay? And the reason for that is because you do damage to yourself when you do wrong. I'll say that again for the video and for you guys. One of the answers to this question is, it is worse to do wrong than to suffer wrong because you do damage to yourself if, and I mean if, you do wrong. Okay? Take a note. And that was actually really key to understanding a lot of Gorgias. You need to get that. Okay, so then we get into the really heavy stuff. So, come on, record. Yep. Okay, so now we get into the really heavy stuff, which is basically Callicles. And Callicles, he's not as weak as Socrates, and he's not as weak as he is just as strong as Socrates. Socrates has pretty well-developed arguments, and Callicles has really well-developed arguments. Polus and Gorgias don't, so Callicles is the third one. And Callicles doesn't hold back. No holds barred, man, right? You know what I mean? He's like, I'm going to full-on go you. And to Plato's credit, Plato really spends a lot of time developing his arguments and putting those arguments forward. So we kind of, Socrates kind of meets his intellectual equal when he meets Callicles. But Callicles is the direct opposite, man. Right? He's the complete opposite. He's an aristocrat who's travelled the world. He knows how wealth works. He knows how society works. And he's just like, I'm not having a bar of this. Okay? So he hears Polus and Socrates agree that it is worse to do harm or suffer harm. It's worse to do harm than suffer harm, right? And he says, I'll disagree, sorry, nah, no way, okay? And then he goes on and he says, look, it's all about happiness, okay? It's all about, he kind of develops this philosophy called hedonism. Hedonism is a philosophy that says pleasure is the way that you should live your life. You should live your life to maximise the pleasure that you live.
Isn't that all called suffering?
Not according to Callicles. Okay. To Callicles, the sole point of life is to maximise pleasure, right? By meeting your desires. And his argument is that it is more. His argument is not that it is more wrong to. His argument is that it is worse to suffer wrong than to do wrong. Okay? So Socrates says it's more disgraceful to do wrong than suffer it, but his argument is not. It's worse to suffer it than to do wrong. Okay? So this is when stuff really gets deep, all right? And we're not going to go into the arguments. We're just going to go into the issues that are raised. So when they have this discussion about whether or not it's worse to do wrong than it is to suffer it, and of course the two disagree, that brings up questions about, well, okay, do we prescribe to the laws of nature or the laws of social convention? Like, what's the most important thing here? What we would actually say is right by social laws or right by natural laws? Okay. We then go on to say, okay, well, it gets us to then think about, is this really about philosophy or thinking, or is this really about happiness? Like, what's the true aim here? Like, what should we be doing? Should we have a philosophical inquiry for the truth, or should we all just get together and live a good life and be happy? Yeah. Should we engage in pure indulgence and eat that chocolate cake and give into pleasure, or should we practice self-restraint? Should we stop and say, no, I shouldn't do this. That's how I'm going to be happier. And then it gets us to think about how do we actually, if we do give into our desires, what's the best way to do it? What do we do? And it also gets us to think about these other things. That's what these two images are about as well. Do we give into our own individual desires, right? Or do we try and seek some kind of agreement and, try and do what's best for society versus what's best for the individual, all right? And let's